I think that your audience would appreciate a little bit of a discussion about colon cancer. It comes up so often in conversation about the colon, and it's such a problem in the African American community. I mean, I've learned something already today. I didn't know that there was such a difference between the rates of colon cancer in men versus women. So that's something that I just picked up on today. But and I have talked to groups about colon cancer before, but I really got a little bit excited. Yesterday I was doing a little bit of research, kind of reading a little bit about the topic, and I came across a study that I found just very interesting because, sometimes in scientific inquiry you find something that you never knew before, and you're really kind of coming up with some new information, but sometimes you just kind of confirm something that you thought was true, and now you have good solid evidence. Let me go into it a little bit. The study is called Fat, Fiber, and Cancer Risk in African Americans and Rural Africans. It was done by a collaboration between the University of Pittsburgh and the University of KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. Boy, I hope I said that right.
I think you did. Yeah.
I try to say it fast, so But at any rate, in the study, what they did was they took 20 Americans who were in reasonably good health, in middle-aged, who consumed the typical American diet. And they took 20 South Africans who consumed the typical South African diet. Huge differences between the two. American diet tends to be low in fiber, high in fat, and kind of the opposite for the South Africans. So they initially did a colonoscopy, and a lot of the Americans were just full of polyps and all kinds of crazy stuff they were seeing in the colons. They did a couple of biopsies. They did biopsies of every single patient actually before the study began. And then the interesting thing they did was they switched the diets. They didn't move the people from one country to the other, but they put the Americans on a typical South African diet, and they put the South Africans on a typical American diet. And what do you think they saw after 2 weeks?
2 weeks?
2 weeks.
You can get polyps in 2 weeks?
No, they didn't see polyps. They actually, and it benefited the Americans probably more than the Africans, because on that initial screening, they found a lot of polyps and they removed them as a part of the study protocol, just to see who's got cancer, who's precancerous, that sort of thing. But they're looking at biomarkers, very subtle changes in the mucosa of the colon that would indicate a precancerous state really early on, inflammatory changes in the lining of the colon. And what they found was that initially, of course, the Americans had a lot of signs of inflammation. Switched the diet, and after 2 weeks, their rates of inflammatory changes in that second biopsy were actually lower than the baseline South Africans. I mean, after just 2 weeks of a high fiber, low fat diet, those changes not only reversed, but they almost normalized. And of course, in the African population, their inflammatory markers went through the roof.
Dr. Fortenberry, you super, cerebral, and you go over my head, so I know a whole lot of other folks. So let me try to make a general simplification of what I just heard you say. You tell me if I'm right or wrong.
All right.
Did you just say that your diet is very likely to dictate whether or not you're gonna get cancer? Is that what I understood you to say, that it's a direct correlation between what you eat and whether you're killing yourself and gonna get cancer?
Yes. The simple answer is yes. I mean, again, we've kind of suspected all along that there is a correlation between your diet and your risk for cancer, and we've seen it kind of in a lot of different ways. We see populations of people who move from a place where there's low rates of colon cancer. They move to a place where there are high rates of colon cancer, and suddenly their rates match that native population. Why is that? You know, of course, there are a lot of ways to connect the dots. But
because you eat the crap that they eat.
Hey, there you go. There it is right there. So, I mean, I just found it interesting. I mean, it just kind of blew me. This was a study done in 2014. Well, I think it was published in 2015. But it to me, it kind of confirms the anecdotal information that's been kicked around for so long, that there is a correlation between what you eat and your risk for cancer.
Sure.
I mean, what do you? I'm not a gastroenterologist.
And I kind of want to get wider with this, Dr. Olosunde. You have seen and lived in both places, and I'm sure that New York and Texas are a lot different. And I'm wondering if Texas or this part of the country is a lot different from Nigeria. But my assumption would be that Nigerians eat healthier, much like the South Africans do, in comparison to here. But what happens, I mean, like in the case of yourself, when you're going to raise your kids here, you're going to stick to what you know works from where you came from, as opposed to those of us who are here who kind of descended from slaves and this love affair that black people got with the pig. It's like there's nothing that you can say that anybody can convince you of as to why you should eat a pig. But we got them from the rooter to the tooter. They love the chicken and the pig.
Yeah, and I know where you're coming from.
You know where I'm going.
Our listeners need to know you're very conscious about your diet. But I want them to know, and you too, there are people that eat the pig and live to be 150 every day, okay? There's just a chance that you're taking on based on what you want to do. I understand. We all need to be like you, eat healthy.
These pig eaters, Dr. Olosunde. Can you do that? Can you let these pig eaters?
Yeah.
Well, what I can say is definitely African Americans and pure Africans have a lower risk of colon cancer than African Americans. And yes, the studies have consistently shown that diets very high in fat and highly processed red meat. I really think that's what the problem is the processing of the red meat that we eat here that actually increases our risk for colon cancer. Diets low in fiber, low in fruits and vegetables will also increase the risk for colon cancer. And which is on the other end, in Africa, you don't find many people come down with colon cancer, but they move here to the States and you see the risk increases, and also because even in Africa, our diets are becoming more westernized. And so there's also that slight bump in the cases of colon cancer, but it's nothing compared to the African Americans.
Okay. All right. Mm-hmm. Well, I know that you want to talk a little bit about the risk and the screenings and that kind of thing. And so why don't we let you get into that, because they need to hear about the risk and the screenings. And you made some very interesting comments when we were outside in reference to African American men and that kind of thing. So why don't we let you share that?
Well, I'll start by saying that colon cancer is the second leading cause of cancer death in this country. And is the second leading cause of cancers in men and the third leading cause of cancers in women. And it is interesting to know that amongst the African Americans, they have a higher rate of getting colon cancer, and they tend to also have it at an earlier age, which is something that's pretty interesting. And even the American College of Gastroenterologists has put out a guideline that African Americans really should be screened for colon cancer starting at the age of 45. And if an African American was supposed to get colon cancer, he's more likely to die from the colon cancer than another person, not a white person, simply put. And if an African American male does get colon cancer, they're also more likely to die, 25% higher risk of dying from that colon cancer than an African American female.
Let me ask you right there, why is it because of the fact they don't have access to the treatments, or what?
Well, because the studies are done in the past, there is that possibility that they're not screened as often as their other counterparts. Mm-hmm. But even having said that, they're also picking up the cancers earlier in African Americans. So I don't think it's just because they don't have the access to healthcare. I don't think that's the only reason.
Okay.
I think there's something that has to do with genetics that also contributes to that risk.
Okay.